Ciao ragazzi, welcome to this week's episode of the JUXT Cast with me, Lucio D'Alessandro,
Alex Davis,
Jason Paterson,
Malcolm Sparks.
On this week's episode, we introduced Jason to the cast, I burst in through the door ruining the episode, and we covered the first of a series of JUXT values, authenticity.
Okay, it's Friday, it's 5 to 5, and it's the JUXT Cast. Big news today, we've actually released the JUXT Cast. Alex, you've put it onto Spotify, to Google, to...
Yeah, it should be just on all the major podcasting indexes.
Obviously, this isn't news to anyone listening right now, but I mean, we have been doing these podcasts for a while, but haven't released them. But then, why did we decide to go public?
Well, we had a few. I think the first one or two. I mean, the first few that we do are always going to be a little rough around the edges as we try and learn a very new sort of industry for us. But we had a few. We thought, no reason to keep everyone in the dark. We'll just start releasing them, and yeah. Very
good. I mean, we'd be quite keen to get some special guests on.
Yeah. I think once we've mastered the art of recording ourselves in one room, we'll move on to challenges like recording people across the world at the same time.
So if you've got anyone you'd like us to talk and have a discussion with, do let us know, and we'll try to get them. So we have a tradition in the podcast of mixing it up, and people who come in who are new get to do a bit of an origin story. So we have Jason Paterson with us today, who's been at JUXT since about Christmas.
Yeah.
And Jason, you went to one of the greatest universities in the world. Tell us where that was.
Well, I did go to Nottingham, but then
Warwick University.
Before that, I went to Nottingham.
Warwick University, greatest university in the world. And what did you study at Warwick?
I did maths at Warwick. So
you did maths. And then how did you come about to learn about computers, or did you do programming on the course?
Well, I dabbled in some basic programming before uni at school, on my own. And during my degree in maths, I did some modules, doing a bit of C, doing a bit of Java, had to do a bit of MATLAB. So,
did you enjoy it when you were, the programming aspects?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So you're in the office in Milton Keynes, you're kind of the master Arch Linux. So when we said to you, you have to learn Arch Linux, you came like, well, I already know. And you seem to know more than anyone else. So how did that come about?
I've been aware of Linux for a long time because my dad has always used Debian.
So your parents use Linux?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't know anyone who else's parents use Linux.
Well, I did have a Windows laptop for a bit, and then I just got sick of it, so I ended up moving to first Ubuntu, and then I was on that for a while.
So this is a natural thing you just grew up with. You saw your dad with Linux, and you just kind of got to know it, and so it was a natural thing.
Yeah, I didn't know it in any sort of great depth.
So in the news, we're getting ready for Heart of Clojure.
Yep.
Next week, is it?
I think we're leaving on Thursday the 1st of August.
Getting the train down. The Heart of Clojure is a conference, the first of its kind. It's in Belgium, and we're certainly sponsoring it. I think we've got concrete sponsorship, and we're going to be there with a booth and a stand, and we are going to be talking about a lot of things, including Clojure, but particularly our Crux database and a new set of tutorials that we're launching. Now, I know Joanna can't be with us today, but they're coming out next week.
Yeah.
So by the time this is out, we should have a whole set of Crux tutorials on the website, which is very exciting. So talking of conferences, we have launched our XT20 conference, or we are beginning to talk about it, which is next July. How many tickets have we got?
256.
256.
Good number.
Oh yes, very good binary number. So we're looking forward to that. Now the whole theme of XT20 next year is going to be the theme of work. Now last time, because we only do conferences every 4 years, last time XT16 was all around the playful aspects of what we do, but this will be very much the workful aspects and the kind of nature of work and the place that work takes up in our lives and our goals, and we've talked about that in previous podcasts. So we want to construct a conference with lots of exciting things and make a kind of, as John calls it, a non-Clojure Clojure conference. So there'll be speakers who are not necessarily in the Clojure world, but in kind of maybe in the technology world or outside that as well. If you're, just to let you know, we are going to have a special discount for people at Heart of Clojure. So if you're going to that conference, there'll be a discount code that you can get and get some money off. It's in a large concert hall or a kind of an old Victorian venue in Aldgate, I think.
Yep.
So details will be on the web. We're going to be launching it. You can buy tickets on the website. So you've got a blog out, Alex. This is the first blog that you've written in a while. Do you want to just give a quick summary of what was?
I mean, it was basically just look at our podcast, or I guess listen to our podcast. Although we do have a video now. We kind of did video for the first 1 or 2 maybe, and then didn't do video because the camera was out of battery, and then we got a new camera, so now we can.
So it's all about learning for us. I mean, we learned how to do the audio. The audio is getting better. Now we're kind of learning how to combine it.
I guess one of the points in the blog post was that we like to do things ourselves, especially when it comes to, I hate the word marketing, but what we show to the world, we don't want it to be from some other company that we just paid to make us look good. We want to try and actually make ourselves look good by ourselves. Come in.
It's
look who it is.
It's somebody come into the studio. It's Lucio.
Yeah.
So Lucio, would you just start by telling us what you were actually doing that made you late to the podcast?
I was trying to get a field name display on top of the field.
That's one of the unfortunate consequences of building forms for a farming application.
Yeah.
A field as in...
a field as in a farmer's field.
A field is yeah.
Lucio is building an agricultural application to help farmers in their fields to work out the best strategies for increasing their crop yields and using data science and a lot of analytics and giving smaller farmers the kind of technology and insights that only large companies would normally get, large agricultural companies. So, and where's this is in... Colombia, can we say this?
Yeah. At the moment, they have different clients, and one of them is this Colombian corporation, and basically they manage many farmers. And so for the farmers, the app is free, so that's great. Yeah, it's although they're not a non-profit organization, they really care about the farmers' data, and they want to do this for the farmers genuinely. They have a very great mission, and so yeah, the corporation will be, they are one of their first clients, and so there are already people using the app, and that's great. There are about 70 farmers currently using the app, so yeah, that's great.
And what are these farmers growing?
They're growing trees actually, so we had to readapt a bit the app because it started from fields. But now they also have some models to analyze the trees from the satellites.
Right.
So, yeah.
So before we were rudely interrupted by...
by a very, hardworking employee.
I was talking about the blog that I just did, where we say how instead of paying other companies to do our marketing and podcast and blog and that sort of thing for us, we like to make it ourselves. And, partly because it's kind of fun to put all this stuff together, but also because, I think it gives off a more sort of authentic feel. And
I think, we have quite a lot of unique values and a particular philosophy in JUXT, and it could be that if you pay other people to kind of message that for you, it becomes second or maybe third hand. And it's better if you can just talk about it first hand with the people who kind of work on that and live and develop that philosophy. So, yeah, it is about doing it yourself. And authenticity is one of the values in JUXT. We have 6 values. Maybe we could have a slot of value of the week. But today's value is definitely authenticity. And authenticity is a word that its root is auto, which is the same root as autobiography. It is about doing things on your own. It's about being self-sufficient. And so even though authenticity is often used in the context of something being truthful or reliable or genuine, I think there is that, but it's also used in the context of doing things themselves. And we do a lot of things in JUXT. We build our own website, we build our own database now. We've built our own standing desks and install our own computers, as I kind of was reminded of today.
While I was setting up the podcast and figuring out how we would record it and edit it and this sort of thing, I did sort of try to stick to using open source software philosophy, I guess, but it makes it very difficult when it comes to editing video and audio. Only like doing that, only using open source, you've got to have a lot of spare time to sink into learning how those things work, because I don't know what it is about. I maybe it's that it's too niche an area. There aren't a lot of programmers who also work on that sort of thing, so you just don't get the investment into it. But looking at some of the professional apps out there and then comparing them to the open source ones is, I don't think there's any industry where it's as big a gap as it is in video and audio.
I think one thing that developers stand out as doing is making their own tools. That's what developers do. They just love doing it, and they're really good at making their own tools. So development tools, the open source development tools, are amazing. But that doesn't necessarily translate to the creative tools or different tools or end user tools where developers are kind of playing away from home and it's out of their comfort zone, and they're not as good, and those things are not as mature.
I mean, it is possible to do all of the stuff on only open source tools. And actually, Blender is something that's a really good sort of creative tool that's open source. It's not really relevant for what we're doing. It's more of a 3D modeling application. But for video editing, there was nothing acceptable, in my opinion, for video. For audio, Audacity does not have the non-destructive editing workflow that you need, so that can't be used. And there is a proper one that I've forgotten the name of, but it's just so complicated. It's like opening the cockpit to a space rocket. I'm sure if I invested the time, I could produce the same results. But
what would be a good open source software that you would say, it's at the level of some, other app out there, but that is not for developers? Going out of your industry makes a difference. Because, for example, even like take the example of Apple, right? They could build awesome things because of the design as well. That's why they had that much of success, because they could do the same things in, Microsoft. But the problem is that the UI really made a difference there. And I think that when you're a developer, if you build your own tools, then it's your subject. You know exactly what you're doing, and you just can optimize on that. While if you build something for someone else, then you think, it'll work because maybe they're used to certain things, but then it's like maybe just, the fact that the UI is not accessible enough for the people that want to use it. Yeah. Then you're missing out opportunities just for that.
Whether to use open source or not, I think it depends. If you're, as you said, Lucio, building upon something, then very often you find those foundations are not the pure abstraction that they might be. And sometimes you need to understand in detail the implementation and the inner workings of that foundation. And that's when you hit bedrock. If something that you're building on is proprietary, that's where you can't go any deeper. And nobody else on the internet can either. And so all the Stack Overflow posts are all weird, like, have you tried kind of poking it on a Tuesday, or, like boiling it in water, or, and it's crazy. Whereas when things are open source, people who have the time and the inclination can go and really understand, and they can take that understanding and then they can answer Stack Overflow articles. And so the spectrum or the graduation of understanding is available. As soon as you start building brick walls of proprietary barriers, then it breaks down. So we need this, this continuum, even though as an individual user, I'm not really interested in kind of understanding how a particular Photoshop filter might work, because I'm not building upon it, I'm just using the tools. So my need for things to be understandable and open source is lessened if I'm only going to be using a photo editor or something, rather than building upon it.
The argument, I guess, to that is, if somebody has open sourced a project and it can do almost all of what you want, but not quite this extra feature, you can commission someone who is specialized in that to build that extra feature for you. And that could be anyone that you could find in the world. You could meet someone at a bar and he's like, oh yeah, I'm a developer, I make audio applications. And you're like, oh well, there's this open source audio application and I want feature Y and I'll pay you X, can you do it? And maybe he can. And with a closed source proprietary software, that's never going to happen. Like, you'd have to try and pay the company, and then that's going to be a whole lot harder. So it would be nice if there was more open source, I guess, investment into that field, but I guess it is too niche for the sort of people. I think you also made a good point about the UI and the design on open source products is often worse than it is when a company is behind it and they're paying for
just because
UI people.
it's coming just from developers. There's no marketing, no business in it. It's just purely because they were interested in it, and then
well some open source, like I'm going to use Blender as an example again. I think Blender now, like it always used to have a terrible UI and super confusing, but then they actually, because I think a lot of companies started to use it, those companies were like, well, we can just invest into making this better because it's open source, and we can just hire some people, and then it started to get this group of people who are building on top of it, and it's now actually really good. It's comparable to any of the thousands of dollars worth of software that's in that industry. So
was it Valve or Unity that just granted Blender some $1 million,
right? Sure.
To invest in, because Blender is now partly used in the pipeline to creating games on Unity.
Yeah, so I guess that's what you need to do. You need to get your open source software just good enough so it's used by some big companies, and then they'll pump full of money, some investment into it. But
it is. I mean, it's encouraging that the values of open source are beginning to kind of infect other domains, because they've been very much kind of at the forefront of development. Open source has been something that we've kind of grown up with, but most of our careers have been, we've had all these tools accessible, which other people haven't. But it's really good to see in the sciences, in data science, and in the research and medicine and studies, the things that mindset, that you need to see all of it. Everything has to be transparent for you to get full understanding. Pragmatism reigns. I mean, if you're running a business, it's great to have that idealism, and we do. We want things to be incredibly open, but sometimes you have to ship.
Yeah, I guess that sort of brings us on to the next topic, which is we've been discussing how we onboard new people, and we have a procedure here in JUXT where we give people a laptop and say, here's a guide that sort of gets you set up with Arch Linux, and go and install everything yourself, work out how to encrypt your disk. It's not just like a standard walkthrough of Arch either. So we were discussing whether that was too off-putting, whether that was too high a barrier to hit when you've just got a job. Maybe we should give them Manjaro or some pre-packaged build that we've put together, and they just sort of load it up and they can actually get to work on customizing it. Or do we make them go through the guide, because then they learn the commands?
Yeah, we've had that discussion of trying to make the guide easier. I mean, JUXT is developing, we're full of procedures internally. We have lots of procedures for various things, and we're trying to get more and more. So, how do I create a strong password? We did that this week. We published a video about how we create strong passwords with dice and offline, and that was fun. But how do we...
In a room with no windows.
With no windows. And you have to shred your passwords when you've written them down. And you have to put the dice back in the beaker, which I forgot to do on the video. And when you take your passwords to shred it, you have to make sure you do that in a room without windows, which we didn't.
Well, it's okay, because we actually have installed anti-satellite cannons.
Blocking devices.
Yeah, blocking devices.
I once... met an astronaut. This weekend is the 50th anniversary of the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landings. So it's very exciting. And but NASA, as this astronaut Story Musgrave discussed, as part of the group in the pub that we were chatting through this thing, is you think NASA is just full of people who are brainiacs who can just figure out everything themselves, but they are an organization that runs everything. Apollo, the whole Apollo missions ran on lists of checkboxes. I think it was before they brought in checklists for planes, or maybe that was a thing I've read recently, that they didn't used to have checklists when they, did planes, flew planes. And then after a while, with certain crashes down to pilot error and so on, they kind of said, well, it would just be easier if we just got everybody to go through these lists all the time. And there's something I think that quite magical that happens when you don't have to think about what am I doing next. You just tick a box and you go through, and your brain can then focus on things that are more creative, or you're not working out the minutiae of what the next task is. So trying to develop a whole set of procedures that work. But also we were talking about making sure that those procedures aren't just one way, because it's really hard for JUXT to come up with procedures that everyone can use. So one of the first things that we're trying to get people to learn how to do is how to give back, how to figure out things, and get our repository, which is a GitHub repository, which is private right now, but it's called Code. It's our sort of code of ethics, and that is full of our policies and procedures. But we try to get that onto somebody's laptop as soon as possible, but in a way that it can be as a read-write experience. If they notice something or they've got something to contribute, they can send that back to GitHub with a pull request, and then somebody can look at that and say, hey, that's a really good extra procedure. We need a procedure for installing Keybase, or for doing video, or for doing the podcast, and having a procedure just for this podcast, for example. I mean, Alex, you do the podcast at the moment, but hopefully, you're going to take a holiday one day. Right?
Yeah, I definitely do need to write up a procedure of how to press all the buttons. I'm kind of waiting until I've got it down to some simple steps, because every time I've done it slightly differently and I've learned a bit more. I think, maybe after this, the last couple have been pretty standard now, so I can...
There's nothing like writing documentation that clarifies and simplifies your thought. You have to make something simple is hard, but to write a document is almost the path towards that. To get to a point where you can argue or explain a concept to somebody, to be a good educationalist, means you have to have it pretty well nailed down in your own head, and that can help. So the art of writing these procedures and standards is, it's certainly a little bit contentious, and we talked about the kind of pushback of, we were talking about, shells, which shells we like to use, what editors we like to use, and certain, things that might not matter, like where we put code. Something that Dominic was talking about the other day was GHQ. Have you ever used GHQ?
Right, the whole file organizing Git thing, right?
Right, yeah, you have this tool that you say Git. My source directory on my laptop is full of, I can't tell you how many hundreds of projects I've cloned, and some of them are mine and some of them are other things, and just and I just seem to get by. But to actually have a good organization of where things come from, the provenance, who made them and what company, and to have that kind of level of organization, so you don't have to decide, you don't have to think about calling this thing a name. And if you've got two projects that are the same name, what do? You just come up with a name. So being able to remove choice, or remove the fatigue of having to make all these millions of decisions every day, can actually free up your brain to not worry about that stuff. And then the less clutter in your brain, the easier it is to kind of think deeply about something else, which is really the point. It's about removing the clutter that's associated with work.
Not removing, because you do it up front. You do it up front, write the procedure, and then you're free.
Yeah, right.
Because if writing procedures will take 5 years, then you gotta balance that a bit. Yeah. Like, how much time do you spend thinking what's the best procedure?
I think you have to make it a part of a tax of working that like I had to install a new laptop today this week, because my laptop died, and that doesn't happen very often. But it was a good test of all of the backup procedures, and I had to get a new YubiKey and all that kind of stuff, and it was fun at times. But it maybe took me 50% longer to onboard myself, because I was very, very keen that I didn't do anything on my laptop without actually thinking, is it in the procedure? And that took a bit of extra time, but we're all beginning to do that, and that means that...
Yeah, it's a community effort, right? You sacrifice a bit of your time so that 10 people down the road won't have to. And
Well, we had an onboarding procedure that used to take a week, and it was a bit of a joke. People were kind of like, that's your first week in JUXT. Right, you are not going to do anything. And Joanna came in and she made an amazing kind of contribution to all the documentation. She's really spent a lot of time, you know, a good week or so, improving the documentation. And then people came, and then you know, in the last year, it's become a bit of a race.
Yeah.
Can you install it? Can you onboard in 2 hours? Can you onboard in an hour and a half?
And I think that Jason still holds the record for that. He boarded in like 1 hour and 20 minutes. Just, yeah. I took a day, so.
Yeah. Do you have that on your desk, Jason? You got a little certificate. Current fastest record holder of setting up the JUXT laptop.
So I managed to get 5 points in table tennis against Lucio, because yesterday you whitewashed me, didn't you? You managed to beat me without me getting a point on the board.
But you see, like the, you know, engineer's mind, you know, you already tried, you know, new strategies, and because you were like, okay, it's not a good strategy to make you make a mistake, so I gotta change that, gotta play more aggressively with you. So yeah.
So we'll see next time if I can get more than 5 points. So I think that more or less wraps it up for this week.
I guess just to wrap it up nicely, in a few words, I said we were discussing whether to give people their laptop pre-set up or to write some steps. Obviously, we've decided to write some steps. Why have we done that rather than just give them?
Well, that's kind of next week's value, which is understanding.
I see.
But
we won't give too much away. We'll leave it on a cliffhanger. You'll have to tune in next week.